Welcome everyone, my name is Missing the Moon. You're watching Devlog number 12 from the Coliseum. This is the randomized platformer levels update. So, for everyone who's new, we're working on a fast-paced 2D roguelike. You fight in a futuristic Coliseum as a samurai, you hype up the crowd because that gets you more gold. Now last update, we added platforming elements to the paths and I saw people play it. Looks really good. Adds a lot to the game, gives a good change between the fighting and now the new thing, platforming. Player uses the same mechanics, but we can add new obstacle mechanics. Really good. So this update, we focused on it. As you all might know, in roguelikes, you usually die a lot and you restart. And there's the same content and you play over and over again. But why is it not that roguelikes are boring? They randomize all their content. You might fight the same enemy, but you fight them and other enemies all of a sudden at the same time. And that changes the whole context of how you fight them. Also, the level context can be changed, so there can be walls all of a sudden in front of you and all that stuff. So we need to randomize the platforming elements that we created, and that's what we did this update. Now, what's the pros and cons of that? First, I think that when you randomize something, it becomes mediocre. If you handcraft it, it can be way better than how it is randomized. Sometimes it's good when it's randomized, sometimes it's bad, but it's always somewhere in between that because you don't really know. It's randomized. But mediocre is still better than you remembering exactly how to play through this path because you already had it a bunch of times and you just know. So that is a lot better. Also in roguelikes, the challenge should never become easier just because you know the layout, just because you know where to jump and where not to jump. So that's also really important. You always need to adjust to the situation. A problem though is these paths take way longer to build, like way longer. It really took longer. That's what I underestimated this update. And the biggest problem is that even though the randomization makes it that people take longer to get accustomed to the same path, the path still uses the same mechanic, the same trap, the same obstacle. And at one point that thing will become stale. So we walk a tightrope. We need to say, okay, well, we need to build enough levels with the same mechanics that we have. So people don't recognize these paths, so we randomize it, and that creates longevity for these paths. And we need to randomize them enough and have enough levels so that you never recognize the same path. But meanwhile, we don't want to spend too much time on it. And also, we want to give you enough mechanics so people don't become bored of these mechanics that are in there, right? So if you just put one mechanic and 50 levels in there, that's kind of boring. So we kind of do like 10 mechanics and 50 levels or something like that. But also, we don't want to put too many mechanics into it because, well, it's a roguelike about fighting. It's not about platforming as a primary thing. The platforming is just secondary. And so if we put too many mechanics in there for platforming and the game is hard because of the platforming parts, then we might as well make a platform out of this, right? And we don't. That's not the focus. So we need to be really diligent with this tightrope that we walk on. Where we want enough mechanics and enough paths so that it doesn't become boring and stale so you don't recognize things. But we don't want too many because it's too much time that we have to put into it and it makes the levels too hard for the wrong reasons. So this is why we did the things we did, and now let's talk about how we did the things we did. So whoever knows me knows that I'm not a big fan of randomizing. In roguelikes, well, unavoidable, and it has really good effects on it, so I like it, but still, I don't like to fully randomize. I like to randomize to a certain degree, but still be able to design the experience that you will have, the pacing that it has, the difficulty that it has, the general gist of it, and then I randomize small parts in it. So this is how we randomize the paths. First, I pick a mechanic, the trap to use in the path, and I make the first half of it. That should be fun by itself. Then I test it. Is it fun? Is it hard? Is it actually possible to go through without taking damage? Is it different from all the other paths that we already created? And now we randomize the shit out of this. So first we randomize the size of holes and platforms. So it's something what it is currently and then some smaller version of it. So it's something in between that or a bigger version, right? I can set all that and it takes time. Then I add extra elements and each element has a 50% chance to actually be there. So sometimes you will have 0 extra elements, sometimes you have 10 extra elements. The more I do, the better it is because then the difficulty will be more averaged out in the middle. The cool thing about that is it makes it a lot harder to actually recognize the same path as the same path because these random extra elements are just sometimes and sometimes not. And this does not have to be a basic element like the electric gate or a hole. This can also be a jump pad. Then we randomize the position of traps between 2 points. So I say wherever you are and wherever this thing are, you are somewhere in between this every time the game starts. Then I also say I switch around the position of traps. So either I say, oh, this trap and this trap switch around the position sometimes. I can also say this trap just goes somewhere, sometimes there and sometimes not. 50% chance again that it happens for each of these things that I put in there. And all these things just make it that they are always, that the path is always a bit different in difficulty and in challenge, and always looks different so that you don't recognize it as the same thing. Especially size makes a big difference. And the fourth step is to repeat the second step to test it again. Is it fun? Is it still possible? Is it hard now, or is it easy? Is it the right difficulty? Is it still different from other paths that we created? All these things we have to go through once again and test it. And then, and this is a lot, I know, but then the fifth part comes where we do the second part of this. Now, why do we do 2 parts? It's really simple. I don't always do it, but I often do it. I flip around those 2 paths every now and then. So 50% chance, once again, that part 1 and part 2 are switched around in positions. That way, every single time that you play it, the same path has 2 options, and then in those 2 options, it randomizes itself again. So it becomes a lot harder to recognize it as this one path. So still, all that does not take away from it becomes stale with the mechanics that it has and all that, but you will not recognize it that easily anymore. And when you have part 2 and part 1 switched around, the difficulty often changes a lot. And also some things are just completely different that way. That's why you need to test again. And it makes it really, really hard, because sometimes part 2 just needs to be changed a lot, because it makes part 1 impossible when you flip them around. That's really hard to do. It's really taking a lot of time, but the randomization is really worth it, because we can still design them in the right difficulty, with making them fun and having a general theme in them itself, but still they're random, so you won't recognize them that easily. And even if you do, the difficulty is still always different because of all the extra elements that sometimes are in there and sometimes are not. That's the most important thing about this. So this week, I came up with the algorithm and I created the paths. It was a lot harder than I expected and a lot more time intensive. So that was all that I could get to, sadly. But next update, I will focus more on iterating over the obstacles, making even some destroyable, so you have an easy way to go through them by destroying them, but you get less rewards because you're slow. So really simple things, make more things how we want them to be. So that's it. If you like what you saw, please comment, like, and subscribe, all the YouTube jazz, and thank you guys for watching. It really means a lot. I'll see you guys in the next video.